All, thrust, withdrawal. Mechanical, efficient, deadly. The second rank steps forward over the bodies and it starts again. This is what made the Spartans terrifying. It wasn't that they were necessarily stronger than other warriors, though they probably were. It wasn't that they had better equipment, though theirs was top tier. It was that they had turned warfare into a science. They had removed the chaos, the randomness, the emotional volatility that defined ancient combat. They were predictable in their excellence, and that predictability was more frightening than any berserker rage could ever be. Now, let's talk about the specific engagement that brings us to our title. The Battle of Thermopylae is famous, right? We all know the story. 300 Spartans hold off the entire Persian army. They all die heroically. It's tragic and glorious. But here's what most people don't know. Before that final stand, before the betrayal and the flanking maneuver, there were 2 full days of combat, where the Spartans and their Greek allies absolutely demolished the Persians. And during those first 2 days, the Persians sent wave after wave after wave of their best troops into that narrow pass. And the Greeks, led by the Spartan King Leonidas, didn't just hold them off, they slaughtered them. And the Spartans themselves? Not one fell. Not one. Let me set the scene. It's August 480 BC. The Persian Empire, the largest empire the world has ever seen, is invading Greece. We're talking about an army that ancient sources claim was in the millions. Now, modern historians think it was probably more like 150,000 to 300,000, which, let's be honest, is saint. Absolutely massive for ancient warfare. This is the army of Xerxes, the king of kings, the ruler of an empire that stretched from India to Egypt. He's already conquered everything in his path. Greece should be a footnote, a speed bump on the way to total domination. The Greeks are panicking. Most city-states are ready to surrender. But Sparta and Athens decide to make a stand, and they choose the perfect place to do it. Thermopylae, the hot gates. It's a narrow coastal pass between the mountains and the sea, so narrow in some places that maybe 50 men could stand across it shoulder to shoulder. This is crucial. When you're facing a massive army, the last thing you want is to fight them in an open field where they can surround you, use their numbers, overwhelm you from all sides. But in a narrow pass, numbers don't matter as much. You can only fit so many men in the front line, and everyone else behind them is just waiting their turn to die. Leonidas, the Spartan king, understands this perfectly. He takes 300 Spartans, all of whom are fathers with living sons, so that their bloodlines will continue even if they fall. He also gathers about 7,000 other Greek allies from various city-states. They march to Thermopylae, and they wait. They build a wall across the narrowest point. They make camp. They prepare. And when the Persian scouts report back to Xerxes that there's a tiny Greek force blocking the pass, he literally laughs. Some ancient historians say he waited 4 days, giving the Greeks time to see the size of his army and run away. Because surely, when they saw the Persian forces stretched across the horizon like a second ocean, they'd abandon their position and flee for their lives. But the Spartans don't run. When Persian scouts creep close to observe them, they find Spartan warriors outside the wall, exercising, doing gymnastics, combing their long hair, just casually preparing their bodies and their appearance like they're getting ready for a festival, not a battle where they're outnumbered probably 1,000 to 1. The scouts report this back to Xerxes, and there's this Greek advisor in the Persian camp named Demaratus, actually a former Spartan king who was exiled. Xerxes asks him what this means. Why are they acting so casual? And Demaratus tells him something chilling. He says, this is Spartan custom. Before they go into battle, when they're about to face death, they always fix their hair. They're preparing to fight to the death, and they're doing it with style. They're telling you that they know they might die here, and they're completely at peace with it. Xerxes still doesn't get it. He sends a messenger to Leonidas with an offer. Surrender your weapons and you can live. You know what Leonidas says? 2 words, molon labe. Come and take them. It's become one of the most famous phrases in history. It's basically the ancient Greek equivalent of saying, you want our weapons? Come try to take them from our cold dead hands. Xerxes is done negotiating. He orders his troops to attack, and this is where it gets absolutely insane. The Persians send in their first wave. These are regular infantry, conscripts from various parts of the empire. They march into that pass, confident that sheer numbers will carry the day. The Greeks are waiting for them in phalanx formation. The Spartans prominently po. 0 casualties. Not one Spartan has fallen. They're not even significantly injured. They rotate off the line, eat their dinner, tend to their equipment, and sleep. Just another day at the office for the most elite fighting force in the ancient world. Day 2 is more of the same. Xerxes throws everything at them, more regular troops, more immortals. He tries different tactics, different approaches. Nothing works. The pass is too narrow, the Greek phalanx too perfect, and the Spartans too skilled. The Persians are dying by the hundreds, by the thousands, and they're not making any progress. None. They can't even force the Greeks back a single step. The psychological impact on the Persian army is devastating. These are soldiers who have conquered nations, who have swept across Asia Minor like a wildfire, and now they're being stopped cold by a force they outnumber so completely it shouldn't even be a fight. Morale is plummeting. Fear is spreading through the ranks. Nobody wants to be in the next wave sent into that pass. There's this incredible detail from the ancient sources. After the first day of fighting, some of the Greek allies are terrified by the size of the Persian army, by the scope of what they're up against. They come to Leonidas and they tell him, the Persians have so many archers that their arrows will blot out the sun. And you know what Leonidas says? He just smiles and says, good, then we'll fight in the shade. That's Spartan humor for you. Dark, dry, utterly fearless. It's the psychological equivalent of saying, that's cute, you think that matters. For 2 full days this continues. The Persians lose thousands and thousands of men. The Greeks hold firm. Lie win. But in that narrow pass, the Persians' numbers became a liability. They couldn't maneuver. They couldn't use cavalry effectively. They couldn't bring their archers into play without hitting their own men. They could only attack from the front, and the front was exactly where the Spartan phalanx was most lethal. Second, equipment. Spartan armor was superior. They had bronze breastplates, bronze helmets, bronze greaves protecting their shins, and those massive bronze-faced shields called aspis or hoplon shields. These shields were about 3 feet in diameter, curved to deflect blows, and heavy enough to use as weapons themselves. Persian conscripts often had wicker shields, leather armor, shorter spears. In a direct confrontation, superior equipment matters enormously. Third, formation and discipline. The phalanx only works if everyone maintains it perfectly. One gap, one broken link, and the entire formation falls apart. Other Greek city-states could form phalanxes, but they weren't as good at maintaining them under pressure. Spartans had been training in phalanx warfare since childhood. It was instinctive, automatic. When men fell, the formation adjusted seamlessly. When pressure mounted, they didn't break. They pushed harder. Fourth, physical conditioning. Spartan warriors were athletes in the truest sense. They could fight for hours without tiring. They could take hits that would drop normal men and keep fighting. Their pain tolerance was through the roof. Ancient sources talk about Spartans continuing to fight with wounds that should have been incapacitating, not because they were superhuman, but because their training had taught them to compartmentalize to keep functioning even when injured. Fifth, psychological warfare. The Spartans understood that battles were won in the mind before they were won on the field. Their reputation preceded them. Persian soldiers attacking them weren't just fighting warriors, they were fighting their own fear, their own knowledge that they were facing the most elite force in Greece. That fear made them hesitant, made them make mistakes, made them die easier. Meanwhile, the Spartans had no such fear. They had been taught from childhood that death in battle was glorious, that cowardice was the only true shame. They didn't fear the Persians, they pitied them. Sixth, rotation and rest. Leonidas was smart about using his forces. He rotated different Greek contingents to the front, keeping everyone relatively fresh. The Spartans, when they took their turn, were well rested and ready to fight at peak efficiency. The Persians were throwing tired troops who had been marching, camping in poor conditions, and watching their comrades die by the thousands against warriors who were fresh, prepared, and utterly confident. Seventh, tactics. The Spartans didn't just stand there like a wall. They used tactical maneuvers, fake retreats, sudden surges, coordinated movements that confused and demoralized the enemy. They were thinking 3 moves ahead, turning the battle into a chess game where the Persians were playing checkers. But beyond all these tactical and strategic reasons, there's something deeper, something that's harder to quantify but equally important. The Spartans had a warrior culture that was unmatched in the ancient world. From birth to death, every aspect of Spartan life revolved around. NT line is filled with warriors who are better trained, better equipped, and fighting in a superior formation. The Persians have to rotate fresh troops constantly because their front line keeps dying. The Greeks rotate because they're being smart about energy management, not because they're losing men. Over the course of 2 days, the Persians probably sent dozens of waves into that pass. Each wave lasted until it was decimated and had to pull back. Each wave left hundreds or thousands of bodies. The Greeks, meanwhile, held firm, taking minimal casualties, rotating efficiently. It's not that the Spartans were invincible, it's that they had created conditions where they held every single advantage, and they executed their plan perfectly. And that's the lesson here, the thing that makes this story so powerful. The Spartans didn't win because of magic or divine intervention or superhuman abilities. They won because they prepared better than anyone else, because they chose their battlefield wisely, because they trained harder and longer than their enemies could imagine, and because when the moment came, they executed flawlessly. They turned warfare into a science, and they applied that science with brutal efficiency. Think about what this means for us today. We're not facing Persian armies, we're not fighting in narrow mountain passes. But the principle remains. Excellence isn't accidental, it's not luck. It's the result of preparation meeting opportunity. The Spartans spent their entire lives preparing for battles like Thermopylae. When the moment came, they were ready, not just physically ready, but mentally, emotionally, psychologically ready. There's this quote often attributed to the Spartans, though we're not sure if they actually said it. Spartans do not ask how many the enemy are, but where they are. It encapsulates their entire mindset. Numbers don't matter, obstacles don't matter. What matters is commitment, preparation, and execution. Face whatever comes with absolute confidence because you've done the work to earn that confidence. The story of Thermopylae is usually told as a tragedy, and it is. The third day, the final stand, the death of Leonidas and the 300, that's heartbreaking and heroic, but we need to also remember the first 2 days. We need to remember the time when skill triumphed over numbers, when preparation overcame impossible odds, when 300 warriors faced tens of thousands and proved that quality can beat quantity if the quality is high enough. The Persians eventually won the Battle of Thermopylae through betrayal and flanking, not through breaking the Spartan line. They never broke the line, they couldn't. Even when attacking from front and rear simultaneously on day 3, they had to overwhelm the Greeks through sheer mass, burying them under bodies. The phalanx held until the very end. And here's the thing that really matters. Thermopylae didn't win the war for the Greeks, but it bought time. Time for Athens to evacuate. Time for the Greek city-states to gather their forces. Time for strategy to develop. The battle that Leonidas and his men fought, especially those first 2 days where they proved that Greeks could stand against the Persian Empire, that inspired all of Greece. When news spread of what happened at Thermopylae, when Greeks heard that 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies had held off the entire Persian army for 3 days, killed thousands upon thousands of the enemy, and only fell when betrayed and surrounded, it changed everything. A year later, the Greeks won decisive victories at Salamis and Plataea. They drove the Persians out of Greece entirely. Western civilization as we know it was preserved, and a lot of historians argue that none of that would have been possible without the stand at Thermopylae, without the proof that the Persians could be beaten, without the time that Leonidas bought with Spartan blood. So when we talk about those first 2 days, when we marvel at the fact that Spartans faced 10,000 enemies and none died, we're not just talking about a military achievement. We're talking about a defining moment in human history. We're talking about a demonstration of what human excellence looks like when it's taken to its ultimate conclusion. We're talking about warriors who literally spent their entire lives preparing for a moment like this, and when that moment came, they were ready. The legacy of Sparta, of that warrior culture, of that absolute commitment to excellence, it echoes through history. Modern special forces study ancient Spartan tactics. The concept of rigorous selection and brutal training to create elite warriors, that comes from Sparta. The idea that a small force of highly trained specialists can achieve what larger conventional forces cannot, that's Thermopylae's lesson. Quality over quantity, training over talent, preparation over passion. But there's a darker side we should acknowledge too. Spartan society was brutal. It was built on the backs of enslaved peoples called helots who were treated horrifically. The Spartans could focus entirely on warfare because slaves did all the actual work of farming and production. The warrior culture we admire came at a terrible human cost. They killed weak babies. They beat children. They created a society where anything other than martial excellence was worthless. That's not something to emulate in modern times. We can appreciate the military achievement while recognizing the moral failures. What we can take from the Spartans is the principle that excellence requires sacrifice, not the sacrifice of human decency, but the sacrifice of comfort, of easy paths, of mediocrity. The Spartans were willing to endure hardship that others wouldn't. They were willing to train when others rested. They were willing to perfect their craft, while others settled for good enough. And when the ultimate test came, they passed it in a way that still leaves us in awe 2,500 years later. Imagine being there. Imagine standing in that phalanx, looking out at an enemy force so large you can't see the end of it, knowing that you, or one of 300 Spartans, a few thousand Greeks total, standing between this massive army and your homeland. The fear would be overwhelming for a normal person. But you're not a normal person. You're a Spartan. You've trained for this your entire life. The men next to you are your brothers, and you trust them more than you trust yourself. Your equipment is the best in the world. Your position is strong. Your tactics are sound. You're not afraid. You're ready. The Persians attack. You see them coming, this wave of humanity crashing toward you. You lower your spear, lock your shield with your brothers, and you wait. They hit your line like a tsunami hitting a cliff. But the cliff doesn't move. You feel the impact transmitted through your shield, through your body, into the men behind you. Everyone pushes back at exactly the same moment, with exactly the same force. The Persian front line doesn't just stop, it crumples. Your spear finds a throat, a chest, an eye. You don't think, you don't hesitate. Thrust, withdraw. The training takes over. It's automatic. Muscle memory refined over decades. The man next to you is doing the same. So is the man next to him. The phalanx is working exactly as designed. Persians are dying. You're not. Hours pass. You rotate out, rest, rotate back in. The Persians keep coming. They die. You endure. Day ends. You've survived. You've more than survived. You've won. Day 2. Same thing. The immortals come. They die too. By the end of day 2, you and your Spartan brothers are untouched. Tired, sure. Covered in other men's blood, absolutely. But unhurt. Undefeated. You've faced the worst the Persian Empire could throw at you, and you've come through without a single loss. That's what we're celebrating when we tell this story. Not just the achievement, but what it represents. The triumph of skill over numbers, of quality over quantity, of preparation over chance. It's proof that impossible odds are only impossible if you believe they are. It's proof that a committed group of experts can achieve things that seem superhuman to everyone else, not through magic, but through the relentless pursuit of excel. NCE. The Spartans at Thermopylae didn't have superpowers. They didn't have divine intervention. They had training, discipline, courage, and each other. And for 2 days, that was enough to hold off an empire. That's the story that deserves to be told just as much as the final stand. The story of warriors who faced 10,000 enemies and walked away without a scratch. The story of what happens when excellence meets challenge and refuses to blink. So the next time someone tells you that quality doesn't matter, that numbers always win, that one person or one team can make a difference against overwhelming odds, remember Thermopylae. Remember the first 2 days. Remember 300 Spartans standing in a narrow pass, facing the largest army ever assembled up to that point in history and not losing a single man. Remember that excellence is earned through sacrifice, that victory is prepared for long before battle, and that a small group of committed individuals can change the course of history. That's the power of the Spartan story. That's why we still tell it 2,500 years later. Not because they all died heroically, though they did, but because for 2 perfect days they showed us what human beings are capable of when they refuse to accept limitations, when they prepare for excellence, and when they execute their training with absolute perfection. They faced 10,000 enemies. None of them died, and in doing so, they proved that, with the right preparation, the right mindset, and the right brothers beside you, the impossible becomes inevitable.